PhD, and welcome back to the Jerusalem Report. I'm Ilana Rachel Daniel. For 4 years strong and without respite, we have been led by the individuals and institutions who have curated an abuse of our trust and systems of belief. Social media is flooded with material designed to create an unavoidable and visceral reaction, and may be recognized as a honing of tools to generate mass havoc. One experimented upon us in real time. Not all the lessons of COVID can be copy-pasted onto this world pivot. There's a whole lot more to learn. There is budding neuroscience that supports a targeted attack of fear on the hippocampus, which deteriorates that part of the brain and can be used to control us in ways we humans have never before experienced. We'll be exploring this in the upcoming segment with decorated scientist and author Dr. Michael Nehls on his findings, which might offer us a broadened understanding of the inexplicable behavior that has consistently appalled us these last years.
Welcome back to the Jerusalem Report. We've been observing aloud the inexplicable behavior of loved ones and colleagues in these recent years of coronamania and can't make sense of the dialogue and actions that they've engaged in. Dr. Michael Nehls joins us today. He's a physician and a molecular geneticist with a focus on immunology, and he's just now released groundbreaking work that comes to offer insight right in this moment of the inexplicable, which we've all experienced, and it's a discussion that could not be more relevant. I want to give a background to the extent of your professional career before we begin, Dr. Nehls. First, as a basic researcher, you've deciphered the genetic causes of various hereditary diseases at German and international research institutions, where 2 of your discoveries were published in collaboration with several Nobel laureates. Your discovery of a key gene in the development of immunology was honored as a pillar of immunology by the prestigious U.S. Association of Immunology. You've been awarded the Hans Prize for Psychiatry by the University Hospital of Rostock for groundbreaking findings on the development, prevention, and therapy of Alzheimer's disease, and spent 3 years as a senior genomics researcher at a U.S. company and 8 years as a research director and CEO of a Munich-based biotech company. As a science writer, you have the unique talent for making these incredibly complex issues comprehensible to a large audience, and you've written several best-selling books that have been translated into several languages, as well as being a private lecturer at congresses and universities. You're a very busy man. Dr. Michael Nehls, we welcome you here today. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you. Thank you, Ilana. I'm very honored actually to be here. I mean, I'm very pleased. The Children's Health Defense was one of my major websites, which I studied, during my work for this book that we're discussing. And also, of course, the work of the founder against the website, which is Robert F. Kennedy with the Real Fauci book, was an insight for me. And I was very pleased actually that the same publisher actually accepted my book in the English version, so that this global problem is not only published in German, but really it gets global attention.
Yes, absolutely. I want to speak specifically, I want to give you a mention from your book that is the basis of our discussion today, The Indoctrinated Brain. So what you're presenting here, Dr. Nehls, it says that the book lays a chain of circumstantial evidence indicating that behind the numerous negative influences lies a targeted, masterfully executed attack on our individuality. You're pointing out how the raging war against viruses are more likely intended than not, fundamentally providing the platform for such an offensive against the human brain that is steadily changing our being and is aimed at depriving us of our ability to think for ourselves. Dr. Nehls, could there be any more concise description of what we're experiencing? Dr. Nehls, I really want to give you the opportunity to describe your work, if you want to just maybe present sort of the major finding and then tell us the background and however you want to give the storyline of how you've come to this conclusions.
There's a long story and a short story, and since people probably want to hear the highlights, I'm stating the shorter story, but I hope I give enough insight that people will be willing to take my book and really dive into the issue, because it's very important. The book, I think, is the first comprehensive diagnosis of what's going on in the world, not only the last 4 years since the beginning of 2020. Years before it already started, I was kind of a crusade against the the issue that people were saying Alzheimer's disease is caused by age. This is what my first book actually on this topic was named in German, The Alzheimer's Lie, because it's really a lie told us so that people don't change their way of living in a way that Alzheimer's could be prevented easily. So there's already an interest that Alzheimer's, which starts as a disease from our autobiographical memory center, which we name the hippocampus based on its seahorse shape, that this disease starts there, and the hippocampus, besides being under attack, essentially creating Alzheimer's disease by a lifestyle that is unhealthy, it's also the major cause of depression. And depression and Alzheimer's are only the tip of an iceberg of a society that runs into these issues that is not able to think for themselves. And to put it bluntly, the hippocampus, and particularly a certain function of the hippocampus, to be able to memorize instantaneously and for long term everything we experience and what we think. This ability is unique for the hippocampus, besides another function which is unique to the hippocampus, and that is the ability to produce lifetime, for our whole life, new nerve cells. It's very unique. Only the hippocampus is able to produce novel neurons every day. And this is necessary so that our treasure of experience grows when we get older. And that actually nature intended for us to become wise when we are aging and not seen as senile. But senility is actually the normal cause right now, but it's not the natural cause. And that's what my books in the past have pointed out. But of course, Alzheimer's is only a tip of an iceberg of a society which has a shrinking hippocampus. Instead of growing by a few percent per year, it shrinks in the Western world by about 1.4% every year. And this shrinkage rate has dramatically increased in 2020. And I was aware of this issue very early, and I made a prognosis that we will have increased depression rates, massively increasing depression rates, by a lifestyle that is even further removed from our natural needs, and that the Alzheimer's rates will go up, and all has become true.
You noticed this, you said, already in 2020 through the research that you were already
done the years before.
I see. From where were you seeing these results? You were continuing your Alzheimer's work, or?
I mean, I was proposing in a paper I published already in 2016, a peer-reviewed article which I published, where with the name Unified Theory of Alzheimer's Disease, where I show that this process of continuing production of nerve cells in the hippocampus, which is the scientific terminus would be adult hippocampal neurogenesis. So for adult, meaning it still happens when we are grown up. It's unusual because no other region of the brain produces nerve cells anymore once we are grown up. The other is it's hippocampal, so it's the hippocampus who produces nerve cells, and it's called neurogenesis for actually production, neuron and genesis. Genesis means the development or the new existence of nerve cells. So the adult hippocampal neurogenesis is not only required that our treasure of knowledge grows when we age, it also has certain other functions. And if you look at all these functions, which I come to in a moment, all these functions together make this production of nerve cells in the hippocampus our mental immune system. That's very important. It's our mental immune system. It's our ability to react to things in the world, or to us in our life, which require thinking, and not just acting the way we acted maybe always before. But it's a time when we have to maybe think on our heels and on our feet, and really rethink what's going on. And to make it more blunt, the Bible says, be fruitful and multiply. But that is also the imperative of evolution. Otherwise we wouldn't be sitting here if our ancestors hadn't, followed this advice. And of course, in order to be fruitful and to multiply, we have first and foremost, we have to survive. We have to survive into adulthood. God or nature, whatever, gave us the ability of defense. We have a defense against microorganisms. This is our natural bodily immune system, consisting of the immune cells. But of course, danger doesn't come only from microorganisms. There are not only pathogenic microorganisms, there are also pathogenic macroorganisms. Pathogenic macroorganisms could be people who want to do us harm. and we have to react to these people. And for this reaction, we have a mental immune system. And the mental immune system, which I show in my book, resides in the hippocampus. It's our memory, our ability to think, our experience, the experience of others, which they have told us, because of every story that is told to us that we have learned from others will be stored in the hippocampus. It's the only region in our brain that instantaneously can store information, stories for long term. It's also, of course, the target for any narrative. Narratives per se are not bad. We love narratives, we love stories. But if this center of our mental immune system is under attack, and that's what my book shows, all these wars against, as you stated them already, against viruses or against climate change, it's always a global war, of course, and all these local wars, there could be global wars. So it's again a scenario where we have to fear for our lives. All these global wars, which I show, could be regarded as a single war against this mental immune system, against the hippocampus, and in particular, the adult hippocampal neurogenesis.
This is, in my opinion, 100% a scientific definition of everything that we have been living through. Please tell us how, continue to tell us the entire story, or if you want to say how you...
Yeah, I can give you some hints maybe why I come to this conclusion. So why is it the mental immune system? If the hippocampus wants to remember something, he has to decide. We learn a lot every day. We experience a lot every day. But of course, the hippocampus is only about a thumb, the size of a thumb here in the temporal lobe, and it has only a capacity of maybe a 1 day's load of experiences. So a 1 day load, and then in the evening it has to upload all the experiences into what I call the neocortical memory center. Yeah, here the neocortex, the hard drive, so to speak. Almost like a computer chip or a chip we have in a photo camera. We make pictures, and in the evening all the pictures have been made. The stick is full, and we go into in the evening onto our computer and make an upload. And the stick is empty. We can make new pictures next morning. Pretty much that's the way it happens. But a certain amount of information is kept in the hippocampus after this upload, this nightly upload. And this is the information where essentially the contents, the pictures or the ideas, the narratives, what we experience, where they are stored in this neocortical hard drive. And I call the neurons which store this information the index neurons. They are kind of an index of what we have experienced. And these index neurons, of course, there are only a certain number, and we run out of the index neurons during the day, and we have to create new ones every night. And this is exactly what's happening by the adult hippocampal neurogenesis. So the adult hippocampal neurogenesis produces these new index neurons, and they only survive if they are used. We have to use them. If we don't use them next day, if we don't experience anything that is exciting, and it has to be exciting because this is the rule how the hippocampus judges if something is important to memorize. It has to come with an emotion. So things which are total routine are not interesting for the hippocampus. If things we do every day, he doesn't memorize. So in the evening when we go to bed, for example, my wife and I, and we blow out the candle that was on our table, we look at each other when we're in bed and said, did you blow out the candle or did I? I can't remember. We both can't remember. We have to go downstairs again and check. The point is, we do it routinely and the hippocampus hasn't memorized. It's a simple example, kind of stupid. It makes me actually, me and my wife look stupid, but it's the way it happens sometimes. So anyway, it has to come with emotion. So that's the one thing. And also it has to have the index neurons available to memorize. And that's why every night new index neurons have to be produced. So what I've shown in Alzheimer's and depression, if these index neurons are not produced, our psychic or psychological resilience goes down. These index neurons, the new ones that are produced, experience everything new. And they can compare with the other index neurons in the neighborhood, the old ones which have old memories. They can compare every new situation we experience and check out essentially, is it really dangerous or is it not dangerous? So if something new happens, our body essentially reacts with a kind of stress. Stress hormones are released. And but once I really look at it in the situation and the new index neurons which have captured essentially this new situation, compare the new situation with old situations and say, okay, it's not really that dangerous, and they drop the stress level. So they are regulating our stress level, the new index neurons. If you don't have a production of index neurons, you are easily put into stress. the stress level is high and it doesn't go down very easily. So we are in a constant situation of stress, high stress level, which essentially is the hallmark of depression. So without index neuron production, we are more prone to depression. And in the long run, actually, it leads to Alzheimer's, which I've shown in my paper, Unified Theory, and which I also explain in detail in the new book, The Indoctrinated Brain. Now, that's the one thing, but is what the index neurons are capable of. They are regulating our psychic resilience. And if the production is down, we are more easily led by fear-mongering, because every fear leads to information, or leads to a high state of vulnerability, of stress. And of course, chronic stress is very harmful to our brain and to our body. So actually the hippocampus starts to shrink. So instead of growing, it shrinks. And that's what we're observing already before 2020. It was, we live in a society which is shrinking hippocampus instead of a growing hippocampus. That's why we have so high depression rates. That's why we have so high Alzheimer's rates. That's one thing. The other thing is the new index neurons need to survive, want to survive, and in order to survive, we have to experience new things. So we have to actually engage in novel things. And in order to do that, it's good that the psychic resilience is high with the index neuron production, because then we are more willing to do new things. Only with a high resilience, we allow ourselves to go into new situations. Of course, if this is also the reason why the index neuron production is also the neuronal correlate of curiosity, natural human curiosity. We are curious because the index neurons want to survive. But if the index neuron production is down, we are not curious, our resilience is down, and we are not allowing ourselves to think about things. We accept what's happening. We are not allowing ourselves, because what I've shown in the book, they are the mental energy we require to actually engage in new thought, in thinking for ourselves, and not allowing others to think for us. So actual real thinking, there was actually a Nobel Prize for Daniel Kahneman in 2002 in economics, but he's a psychologist, and he discovered that we need a certain amount of energy to engage in real thinking. And what I've discovered in my work is that the neuron production in the hippocampus provides this energy. Their free synapses are the equivalent of the mental energy we need to engage in thinking. So that's one of the three reasons why it's very important to have a high production of neurons in a productive production, really a surviving of cells production of neurons in the hippocampus. And that's why, on the contrary, in the reverse, they are, of course, under attack if I really want to conquer the mind of people. If I want to rule the people, I have essentially to shut down index production in the hippocampus. That's the easiest way. Essentially shut down or kill their mental immune system. And I can do with whatever I want to do with these people.
So
yeah, please go ahead. Please go ahead.
The production is stopped by fear. That's it. By anything else, but it's by fear essentially, which lowers the production, which is a combination of stress, which is I guess drains us, which leads to depression, which is essentially that fear is shrinking the hippocampus itself. Is that the most layman's sort of? I might be missing a few steps here.
Yeah, I'm just very quick at the moment. So there are many things which come together. So fear actually creates a death cycle to the neurogenesis process. But there are many ways you can shut it down. There's, for example, the law of minimum. It's a law we know from agriculture. What is the minimum a plant needs to grow? And the same law, which comes from a German agricultural scientist from 1828, a very long time ago, almost 200 years now, he discovered that every plant we grow on a field needs certain things. And if certain things are missing, the plant will not grow. And if if X is missing, we cannot give it more to the plant of Y, because X has to be replenished. The same goes for the hippocampus. There are certain things the hippocampus needs that the cells grow and the production is fruitful, so to speak. And there are many things, when they are missing, the production stops or is really low. One thing is, for example, we need physical activity. We need people we engage with, contact with people. We need people who tell us stories, and we can tell stories too. So we need to be social active. Social activity, for example, leads to the production of an hormone in our brain, which is called oxytocin. And oxytocin is the key fertilizer for an active production of nerve cells in the hippocampus. So if, for example, we shut down interrelationship, if we do unsocial distancing, then we shut down the oxytocin production, and then we're essentially also shutting down hippocampal growth. The same goes if we tell kids they shouldn't go to, there's no sport anymore, that they have to stay at home, that they cannot engage with other people. What also is required, we need what we call eustress, not distress or no stress. We need a certain amount of stress, a healthy form of stress, which is very closely linked to a purpose in life. So, but if people are removed from a purpose in life, which we have, for example, the lockdowns served that purpose for many people, then of course this is missing, and a lot of fear is happening. How can I, feed my family if I don't have a job? My job is essentially in danger. So there are many things that are necessary. Also good sleep, and of course, if we in late night we hear all these war narratives, or what you experience right now, that doesn't really serve a good night's sleep. So and sleep is important, because only when we sleep well, deep sleep is when these nerve cells are generated. So there are many things, of course, but of course, once you are in a state where your resilience, your psychic resilience is down, every stress becomes a huge stress with a huge amount of stress hormones being produced, plus the nerve cells are overreacting, leading to production of certain cellular proteins which activate what we call neuroinflammation. And neuroinflammation is essentially the most efficient way to block adult hippocampal neurogenesis. As that means the inflammation in the brain. And what I've seen, and that's really essentially was the last brick in my wall, so to speak, when I made this discovery in 2021, and which led to the book that we are talking about now, is that we already knew from SARS-CoV-1 in 2002 and 2003 that the spike protein of a coronavirus is able to induce neuroinflammation very strongly, actually. So the spike protein is a neuroinflammatory agent. And if the spike protein in an acute infection, of course, we have maybe a short-term stop of production of hippocampal nerve cells, which is not a problem. I mean, if I'm sick, if I have an inflammation, acute respiratory infection, it's maybe not bad to be not that curious at that moment, just go to bed and sleep and recover. It might actually be a purpose why this is happening. But if we manage to have a long-term presence of spike protein in the brain, then it becomes a real issue. The SARS-CoV-1 was not able to enter the brain, the spike protein. Actually, it creates inflammation in the body, and the cytokines, the pro-inflammatory cytokines, can enter the brain. But with SARS-CoV-2, something new happened. The genetic engineering led to a new spike protein that has a cleavage site, which we all know about, the furin cleavage site, and the S1 subunit of the protein, which is the one which engages with the immune system and activates neuroinflammation, is actually able to cross the blood-brain barrier. And if you cross the blood-brain barrier, it can really penetrate into the brain and activate, and it was shown to activate the immune cells to produce cytokines, interleukin-1, interleukin-6, and a couple of others. And it was shown interleukin-1 is the most potent inhibitor of adult hippocampal neurogenesis. Wow. So I make people extremely vulnerable if the spike protein is present. Now one can say, of course, the virus itself has this issue, and it was shown that the spike as one subunit actually enters the brain from people who have been infected. But it's even worse, of course, if I start to inject the genetic material of this spike protein that encodes the spike protein into the body of many people, even children and so forth. And this is unbelievable what's happening. And while maybe there's the argument that the virus was not released on purpose, it was just an accident, what's really happening on purpose, of course, is this program that leads to the injection of the genetic material. And here, of course, people had a choice to change the course of action, and they didn't. So here I see the first time a real evidence for a purpose in what's going on.
It's really profound what you're saying. A couple questions. Have you found anyone today without the influence of the spike protein on their hippocampus?
I'm looking at such a person every morning in the mirror, I guess. To make people, let's say, not that worried about this is, first of all, I had the coronavirus infection also quite severely, actually, because I had a bacterial superinfection, and I was down for a few days. And but since I know what the hippocampus needs to be happy, since I wrote a couple of books about this, and the new one shows exactly what's necessary. It's also a formula against indoctrination, which I have in the book, which really explains what people need to do to save the hippocampus and to have it grow instead of shrinking. And so I think if everything is good, if you're not prone already to a shrinking hippocampus, then the virus is not that much of a problem. I think we can survive the issue because we get, and it was actually shown. So if people, for example, were depressed to begin with, the risk of developing long COVID or post-vac, which are both combined as spikopathy, or spikopathy, I don't know how to pronounce it correctly, spikopathy maybe. The spikopathy, the development of this problem with brain fog and so forth is much higher if you're already depressed to begin with, meaning that your hippocampus was already suffering to begin with. But if your hippocampus is actually doing quite well, if you're happy, if you stand up in the morning and say, well, I want to learn new things, I'm excited to be alive, and I want to change the world, then of course the infection wouldn't make much of a difference. Of course, you're down a few days, but you recover and the thing is over.
So I want to be clear a couple things, because when I asked about the spike protein was, of course, not only people who had even necessarily been infected with whatever it was, and certainly obviously not injected. But I mean, is there any indication that there's spike protein in the environment, that exists in the environment, that might have a continuous effect? Because I was actually also writing here, brain fog. I mean, is there anyone you hear today who doesn't complain from brain fog? And certainly this was an issue which I would talk about, the use of cell phones and all the effect that that's had on us already prior. So
absolutely. Cell phones, mobile radiation is shown to increase neuroinflammation, so it can ignite the process. But again, neuroinflammation is certainly controlled by many things, and the question is an event that you're experiencing now fueling this neuroinflammatory process, or are you still in a position where you can engage in thinking, in reacting mentally, and are not driven essentially into depression? And I think this is where people have to have a strong neurogenesis to begin with, and have a lifestyle that realizes what's dangerous for the brain, what's not. So, for example, I don't possess a mobile phone. I don't touch it, and it doesn't mean that I wouldn't use it if I have to. And I don't fear that my brain gets killed immediately when I'm close to such a phone, but I don't use it regularly, and I wouldn't put it on my ear in close proximity to the brain. So just to give you an example, but I also know that there are certain things that most people don't eat, even though they are fundamental for mental health. For example, aquatic omega-3 fatty acids. Humankind has evolved as what I call not hunters and gatherers. I wrote a book about this. It's called the algae oil revolution. Humankind has actually developed as fisher and gatherers. So fisher and gatherer mean our main staple food was actually fish and fruits of the ocean. And they're high, for example, in what I call aquatic omega-3 fatty acids. The lie that we are told is that we can create our own high-level omega-3 fatty acids, which are required, for example, as building stones for new neurons, by just eating, let's say, certain oils from plants. But the point is, we cannot efficiently transform them biochemically to the building blocks we need for our brain. And so the less people eat fish, the smaller the hippocampus. And that's why I wrote the book. The alternative is algae oil. That's where the fish actually get their omega-3 fatty acids from the food chain in the very beginning. And so I make sure that my brain actually works, and my books tell people what they should do. So there are a certain number of people who do that, and they are not endangered so much in either, actually by an infection. And of course, they are also smart enough not to get injected. Humans are herd animals. You know, they follow the herd. That's where we feel safe, because when we are surrounded by other people, we feel safe. It's much more difficult to be slaughtered by somebody from outside if I'm in a group. So people feel safe. That's completely natural. But humans have also evolved culturally. We're not sitting in a cave anymore. Why don't we sit in a cave anymore? I guess because there were a couple of people who said, well, even though it's nice to be in a group, it's also important to know what's behind the next valley, what's behind the next hill. So there is a certain group of people in a society, in any group, that are willing to sacrifice the safety and go beyond essentially the group feeling. And this was actually carried out in an experiment. It's called the confirmation experiments by Solomon Asch in the mid-50s, I guess, of last century, where he showed that about 22% of people don't follow the mass, but follow their common sense. And they actually, and the mass actually followed the mass, even though it was totally obvious that what was shown to them was wrong. But they said, well, if the others say it's right, then it's right, even though it was really obvious, visually obvious, it was wrong. And so I was wondering why these 22%, and that's exactly the same rate we have experienced here in Germany, where people, about 22% didn't get the injection. And the question is, why is the same percentage? Is this just an accident, purely random coincidence, or is there something behind that? And I'm at the moment, coming from evolutionary sciences, evolutionary research, I'm almost convinced that there must be a certain percentage in a population every time that, and that's actually despite having a strong hippocampus or not, that are essentially not following the herd immediately, but are more prone to be critical, just basically from their genetic makeup. And if these people wouldn't exist, we wouldn't be here today. And because television wouldn't have been invented, Zoom wouldn't have been invented, and whatever we do to communicate. All these things have been invented because people did something what other people didn't do before. So if we are only able as a human society to follow the mass, then we would actually run around in circles for the last hundreds of thousands of years. We might not be even here anymore. So I think this is genetic. My answer is there must be a genetic factor that by a certain distribution of our genes, there is a likelihood that a certain percentage of a group will not be so easily be, I would say, guided by the mass and actually follow their own rules.
I think that's incredible. 20%, I guess, is somewhat encouraging. I guess the question is how much of that 20% is, seeking innovation for the good of humanity versus for their own personal gain. I guess you might divide that 20%.
Yeah, it could not be everybody, but the basic idea of humans is to be social. I mean, that we have something like acquired sociopathy, that there is an inborn sociopathy by a very, very low percentage, but a very high percentage might be actually acquired sociopathy. Of course, those rules don't apply anymore, and I'm very worried about this. But what also Solomon Asch showed, because it's not like a black and white, it's not like 80% are like this and 20 like this. If this is really a genetic cause and the genes are sorted randomly, when we are born, we have random genes from our parents and not always the identical pattern. And this randomness means that it's more like a Gauss curve. So we have the Gauss curve for people who are following their own rules, and here we have the Gauss curve who follow other people's rules. But there is an overlap. And this overlap was also shown by Solomon Asch in the experiment. So when not 11, it was 12 people, and 11 said wrongly that something is correct, but it was on purpose, that they were instructed to do so. And the 12th person was asked, what do you think? And only 20% actually said, well, what they are saying is wrong. Look at the picture, this is correct. And but if from the 11 was reduced to 10, and there was one also not with the mass, then the likelihood from 20% increased to 30 to 40%. So there are some people who go against the mass on their own, but it might be sufficient to have at least one other person in the group who is also following my common sense, that I'm more likely to go against the group. And this is what I'm really relying on. If these 20% become strong and active and actually voice their opinion, then there's another 20% maybe who actually say, well, I've heard your opinion and I always felt there's something wrong, but I followed the mass, of course, because I didn't know better. But now when I hear you, Yeah, you are right. And now we're suddenly at 40%. And interestingly, if this 40% is really loud, then the other 60% who just follow the mass really believe the 40% are the new mass. They will follow them too.
You said something that you've noticed, something about psychopathy increasing. Did you want to comment on that? Or
what I point out is if I believe that people actually are social beings, that all humans, when they are born, have genetically or how we are as humans, an interest to maybe build a family, to be socially active, to help others. That's the majority. I still believe that, and I strongly believe that. If I wouldn't believe that, I wouldn't actually write my books. But of course, there are certain people, and it was shown that the more power you have, the more you remove yourself from society. The less for example, your mirror neurons are activated. It was shown scientifically, and a lack of mirror neurons that you actually can feel what others feel is a typical sign of psychopathy. And essentially, with the more power you have, the more you shut down your mirror neurons, and that's what people call acquired sociopathy.
Wow.
So that's the danger. And the problem is that the more sociopathic you are, the more likely it is that you become very successful in businesses that don't care about people. So it's very likely that at the top of many of these companies are either sociopaths, but more likely even acquired sociopaths, because first of all, they might have been actually normal people, and that's why they got positions, CEO and whatever, in certain companies. But with the power comes the acquiring of sociopathic traits, and then of course the sky is the limit. But these people then believe really essentially disconnected from the rest of the world, from the feelings of the rest of the world. They really feel that they are godlike. And there's actually a death cycle in a way that actually we believe, because we are weaker, we are not that successful, we believe actually these people have more abilities than we have, which is actually not the case. They actually have a lack of something which would stop us to become such a person. Because I was once in a seminar, a psychologist from Harvard University was here in Germany, and was invited to a seminar with him, and he said, in the group, and this group consisted only of investors. So I was CEO of a company, but there were all my investors and other investors were there, or people who are really rich. And he asked a question. He asked, so when is a person rich? How much money, or how much money do you need? And then it was almost like an auction, 10 million, 100 million, 500 million. And he looked at them and said, no, you are rich when you don't need any money anymore. When you have enough. And all these people apparently didn't have enough. I, for myself, I have enough, and I have enough that I can write books. And I don't care how much money I make with books, because it's not important. Important is that I have enough, and that I'm driven actually by getting this message out, because I want to have an earth and life on earth possible, that my children and my potential grandchildren in the future is a life that is worth living, and not a life which is dictated by some psychopathic technocrats who believe that they own the world. That's why I'm writing books.
Amen to that. Really, I couldn't agree more. I want to talk more about this attack on the hippocampus, the very artificial attack that's being made on us. Certainly, we talked about how the cell phone in every hand, and the work on the Jerusalem Report, we've talked in depth about the mind control tactics, about the pornography, the video games, the absolute abuse, the whole concept of the metaverse, which in my opinion is really training an entire generation to not only destroy their empathy and, every bit of human contact that you've described. I mean, a sort of a generation of living on this sort of lockdown restriction type of thing. But, I see it as specifically attack on the actual. What got me into vaccine safety, true vaccines, was the attack on the body element, certainly on the most vulnerable of the population. So this is really equal the same, where we see this practice to see how much the brain can take of stimulus and to really actually change the brain and its functioning itself to really kind of have life on the metaverse without purpose, done by AI. And in this entire general push, on some of the excerpts of your book, which was 100%, we all see this push towards centralization of power. I mean, like I've been saying, I mean, what's the point of having massive amounts of wealth and power if you're not trying to consolidate it, right? So, but you have also all the real human. What I see that so people are missing between the idea of conspiring to keep that power versus the majority of people who are human and fallible and every level of corruption and need and greed and all of the good and the ugly in between. I think people have sort of lost the plot and being able to sort of differentiate like in the reality. So if you want to comment on that in general, how it's been used through the phone, through the cell phone, through moving our lives online. Certainly you have endless examples such as Cambridge Analytica scandal and all of that type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, what I describe in the book, and it's really the one thing that really makes me worrying, is actually the key factor of the book, the key issue. Besides that, the mental immune system is down by corrupting essentially neurogenesis in the hippocampus with all the measures I've talked about. I asked my question, that was actually the starting point of writing this book. I asked the question, what happens actually if I don't have new index neurons being produced? What if I really shut down with the measures in 220 and the injection program that started in 221 and continues, and now in Brazil even forced injections in children? What happens when I'm forced to remember something? Well, what happens if I'm essentially getting informations that come with emotion, and computer games, the games that are presented in the media and the news about that are going on worldwide? Let's call them games. It's a very soft way to name them, but they are horrific, horrible games with a lot of fear. Well, our hippocampus is forced to remember. And he remembers all these narratives, fear-mongering narratives. And because there are no index neurons available, because that was shut down, the production by the neuroinflammatory process, then of course, old index neurons are being used. We are forced to remember. We will remember next day what we have heard the evening before, because it was horrible. So this use of index neurons that are actually were being used for memories, maybe from my birthday, from my wedding, whatever I experienced in my life is memorized by index neurons. But of course, with the shutdown of index neuron production, the new information will override these index neurons and create the new memories. So the old memories are gone. So I lost a piece of my personal history. And if this process goes on for a few years, maybe until 2030, then a large majority of the people will only consist, based when we look at their personality, at their individuality, on the narratives that have been told for 10 years. And such a society, maybe a majority of people who essentially consist only of the narratives and the stories that have been infiltrated into the brain by the main media through the developed by technocratic psychopaths and people who work for them, then of course these people will have only one option to get out of this problem. They see, of course, based on the stories, that no government in the world can solve the problem. So the only way to solve the problem of the worldwide crisis, whatever it is at the moment, will be a totalitarian global government of the whole world. And this is my biggest fear, that we don't have, when it's necessary, the right number of people to oppose this development. That's a majority which cannot engage what Kahneman said, type 2 thinking, the actual thinking, but are only engaging in the learned behavior based on these narratives, which is type 1, not really thinking. He called it, his book, fast and slow thinking, but the fast thinking is not thinking, it's only fast reacting. And another Nobel Prize winner, Francis Crick, called it the zombie mode. Actually, the operational term when I wrote the book was the zombie apocalypse. Or apocalypse? How to pronounce it correctly?
Zombie apocalypse, yeah.
Apocalypse. That was actually is the working mode, because it's a zombie mode of action that we just do what we are forced to learn what is our standard behavior because we are not able to think for ourselves. And that's why we have really quickly used the diagnosis that is in my book to start a therapeutic approach in the society, that the 20% read the book, because it's the only percentage, only people who will actually look at the book. These are the 20%. And with your help now, try to engage, to read the book, but then look in chapter 7 and see, okay, that's what I have to do to preserve my mind. But then in chapter 7, I will also tell people how they have to find a new purpose in life. And that is to engage others into thinking, and don't stop just because they tell you, I don't want to hear. Just continue. And because we are continuously told the same narratives all over again every day. And we have to be I would say, do in the harassment business and do the opposite and tell them essentially that is not the way we have to go, that there's an alternative, and show them the alternative to get to the other 20%. And 40% in most states is already a majority.
So I want to be clear, I can use any image to make anybody the enemy once I'm using, meaning I have seen, particularly on Twitter, I see so many images that I see the visceral reaction that one can't protect themselves. You can't, the moment you've scrolled past and you've seen these, you have a visceral reaction you absolutely can't protect yourself from. So essentially, if I'm the one putting those images out, I can make anybody the boogeyman. Like I can pretty much decide who
you can try.
Here.
You can do it and you can try to do it, but if it really is effective depends on what kind of hippocampus you're approaching. If you're an hippocampus who is only able to this type 1 reacting to the zombie mode, then of course the information will be installed and with no essentially check and balances.
Right.
But we have the system 2, the ability to think and ask ourselves, is this really real? What does it mean in your context? What does it mean really for me? Is it really that important to know this while other things are going on? I mean, you talked about empathy. We are essentially lured into getting these injections by the process of empathy. We have to be empathic to people we don't know, but people who are shown to us in the TV, the suffering people in the hospital, and you have to get the injection to save these people. But this is type 1. This is type 1 acting, but it's not really thinking. And in the book, I propose an alternative view of the world, which I call rational compassion. But rational compassion requires really rational thinking that is type 2. That means we have to reflect what we do here. What consequences does it have for my own life, for the life of my beloved ones, but also the life of people in other parts of the world? To give you an example, when I visited a doctor in summer 21, she asked me, it was a checkup, and she asked me, Michael, you are a doctor, you have to get this injection now. You know, you need to, you have to lead by example. I said, first of all, I've studied the literature and I know this stuff doesn't work. Quite contrary, it's harmful. And second, if you argue about being empathic and save others, which it doesn't, which is proven meanwhile, but it was already proven at the time because there were already publication outs by the CDC, which clearly proved that this stuff is not working. But she didn't want to hear this information. And I said to her, well, did you know that the lockdowns were partially financed by shutting down the World Hunger Help? That people suffer from death worldwide by not getting enough food because we shut down the help in order to finance the lockdowns? Well, the only thing this very empathic person told me, well, it's good that we live in Germany, not there. Okay, I said, well, that doesn't really answer the question, isn't it? I mean, this is really, but she was not able to what I call rational empathy, that she couldn't essentially put into her mind what happens in other parts of the world because she only was focusing on a local issue, and a local issue which was biased in the way it was presented to her. But even this bias she couldn't see because she wasn't able to think laterally, to think to engage in type 2 thinking. And that's why I think we need both. We need a strong hippocampus. If the war is against our hippocampus, that was how I started the discussion with you, and the war has to end there. We have to create weapons in the hippocampus to fight against that. And our weapon is neurogenesis. We have to activate and keep it active, the neurogenesis in the hippocampus. This is where our mental immune system resides. And if we make this one strong, we can survive this wars. That's what's really happening. That's the only way I can see out of this. This is my diagnosis, and this is my proposal for a therapy.
I couldn't agree with you. I mean, really and genuinely, not only with every word, because I from my perspective and the things that I'm seeing and the conclusions that I'm coming to is, in real time and writing about are 100% that is the entire point of this endeavor. And actually I have also another podcast project in the makes, which is exactly to encourage this analytical thinking, which has been completely under attack. I want to go back and sort of make maybe a summary if there's any parts that you wanted to fill in, and I want to be 100% clear on your formula for fixing it. So we are also saying that the spike protein injections, mRNA, whatever we're calling them, the only logical reason for having injected 6-month-old babies and people who have already had the illness and all of these things is, in your opinion, to further weaken the hippocampus to be susceptible to, is that correct?
That's the only sense I can make out of this. Of course, one can argue some people want to make a lot of money by this program, and they certainly do. But to be honest, people who are billionaires, it doesn't really matter if they have 2 billion, 5 million, or billion, or 1,000 billion. This is about power. And if you want to have power over people, and we already know that the community, let's say the world community, the whole world, what is going to be installed in the world is a new operating system of how people have to live in the future. And this operating system is if you really look into detail, not only what some people write, there's whole books about this from the people who actually drive this process, but there are also documents in the government which clearly state what until 2030 will have to happen. And this is so far removed from what people, what humans need, what their natural requirements are to be happy and to be alive and to be human, then it's totally anti-human what's happening. So in order to accept that, and in order to be able to install an operating system, we know from computers, the only way to do that is to have to reformat the hard drive. And in order to, what I've shown you in the last almost 1 hour now, is that the hard drive where our memories are stored is driven by the hippocampus, and the index neurons have the connection to these information. So if you kill the index neuron production and you override all the index neurons, you essentially erase the hard drive, and you can install whatever you want. And this is exactly what's happening.
It's 100% what's happening. And we were talking, in the formula that we're using is to continuously engage in discussion, in taking your lead in either not having one of these spy devices in our hands that is constantly influencing. I think at least unplugging more and more. But again, you're saying the antidote is 100% in our hands right this moment, because we can engage people also in discussion. The fatty omega-3s. I think you mentioned something also about vitamin D in something.
Vitamin D is important. I mean, there are many things important. For example, if I'm a vegetarian, then I of course need vitamin B12. You find all this in my book, of course, and I'm not saying vitamin D or omega-3 fatty acids are the key to everything. There's not a single micronutrient, not a single vitamin, not a single essential mineral that our brain, our body can live without. I'm only singling out 2 or 3 as an example, because they are most likely deficient, even if people say they eat healthy. Right. And we need everything. And if we don't have them, the likelihood that our hippocampus suffers is higher, and the likelihood that we are influenced by outside forces is much more easy.
Dr. Nels, I'm genuinely grateful for your input, for this such a sane, comprehensible, scientific explanation for what we are actively been under the psychological terror of what we are experiencing and have been experiencing. I mean, it just makes so much perfect sense. If there's just 2 end questions, do you want to comment on how you believe that there is a specific elite, if you will, or whatever, everybody's got a pet name, for people who are driving this type of destruction of our ability to reason?
Well, I mean, the pharmaceutical industry certainly has no interest that we are healthy. You know, I mean, this is they claim that they are a health industry, but they live from the sick, from the diseased people, and diseases that are long term, like depression and Alzheimer's, are of course a gold mine for them. So it could also be that they are just interested in different, that these diseases are leading in the world, so that they have a huge income. But this is too short of thinking. Certainly, when we look what happened the last 3 years or 4 years now, uh, clearly there's more to it than just making people sick so they can sell their drugs. This is clearly when you see what with the spike protein and all the measures that were so totally contrary to health of people, that it's clear there's something else going on. And of course, it's only a hypothesis. And I tell actually my readers in the last chapter that I'm kind of a lawyer, you know, that puts out all the evidence, but it's the jury, the reader has to decide. But never, even if I'm wrong, and there is nobody planning that, it's actually happening. So it doesn't matter if there is somebody planning it or not, it's happening. And so whatever advice I give, that advice is necessary to be taken. Otherwise, it happens if there's an intention or not.
100%. It's 100%. How have your colleagues, you're a respected, noted scientist, how have your colleagues received this research?
Well, I have to await this. You know, my book in Germany is just out for, since the beginning of September. It's since then a bestseller in Germany, so it's welcomed. People realize this is the explanation they have been waiting for. This is comments I get from many, many readers, but also from many scientists and friends of mine, of course. Friends are always supportive. We have to see. I have not seen anything negative besides maybe some criticism that it's all conspiracy theory, you know, but people can laugh about this. This is idiotic because, sorry for the word that I'm choosing here, but the evidence is on the table. And that's the one thing. Now it comes out in America in December 2023. In America, meaning in the world, because it's an English translation, so everybody can read it who is able to read English and should. And I think here, I'm curious what's going on. What I experienced is that, for example, my Wikipedia, at least in Germany, was pristine in a way. It was not touched by anybody except my credentials were in there. But when I gave an interview a few months ago about the book, it took just one day that people put in there that statements which were totally wrong. And it was interesting when I tried to correct them with evidence, publications and so forth, they were accepted and were removed a day later again. So of course it starts now, I guess, that people want to frame me for whatever. And I'm expecting that, and I'm relaxed actually, but because it's going to happen. As my father put it one day, if people start to fight against you, then you're on the right course.
Right, 100%. And I think that's really key. The whole point that facts don't matter is just such a enforcement to all the things that we've talked about. That there is, you know, we are in a world of there is incredible incoherence, and humans, it's a torture mechanism, a well-oiled one, and humans seek coherence and will do just about anything. And we see that facts, there is still objective fact. There is still, and in order to have a functioning civilization, which also you brought up at the beginning, we have to be able to agree on a certain amount of some sort of central facts, you know? And there is still objective reality, and the ability that watching that have zero effect on people's ideology is incredibly, it's not only terrifying for the future, it can't even, you know, thinking about what happens when we get from 2023 closer to 2030, but it's actively lethal. I mean, people are dying and being attacked.
Humankind will be over in 2030 if that happens, if that really the plan is fulfilled. There's a quote which says you can ignore reality, but not the consequences of reality. And I see many people, even in my family, who have been ejected and suddenly had a home office, and it was an advantage for them. It was less traveling, and they were laughing about me. Yeah, well, they said, you are worrying about what's going on, but we are winners of COVID, because now our life is even easier, yeah, for the moment. But I realized that they watch more closely, meanwhile, my words and hear what I'm saying, and they realize that they might be short-term winners of what's going on. There are a lot of short-term winners. Yeah, there are doctors with injections. They earn a lot of money. There are a lot of winners out there, and but at the long run, we all lose, and we have to make that clear to them.
I appreciate that. I think that's really a call to continue to keep the voice of speaking truth to power and engaging. And I actually have said this in different contexts, which I believe that ultimately we can get to a place of being able to choreograph, all of our different perspectives if we stay in the conversation. It's a matter of being able to stay in the conversation and not shut down the doors and walk away, which I think will enable. And this is only enriches that.
I have a book. It's actually written by a CEO. I don't know how to the name, but the title of the book is "Survival is Not Enough." And I have this in mind all the time, the title itself. I'm 100% sure that not only we will win this war against us, we will get out of it better. It's not just surviving this war. Actually, we will learn through this war, and by surviving it, that we actually create a world that is even better than the one we had before.
Amen. I believe that too. Otherwise, I wouldn't be fighting so hard. I absolutely believe that. I think that this is the opportunity, and I do think we'll get there. I certainly hope sooner than later. Dr. Michael Nels, your book, The Indoctrinated Brain, is coming out in mid-December in English, December 12th. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. At a good time, B'Shat Tova, we say in Hebrew. Is there where can people find you, your work, keep up with you, and keep in the know?
Actually, even though Google is not a word we should use too often anymore, but we can easily find me, my name, and I have a website. I have a German website, but I also have an English website, which I fill with information all the time. I invite everybody to actually, get my newsletter, because I push information out all the time. Just recently, I added the idea that an essential trace element, lithium, can be used actually against brain fog. It is used against Alzheimer's. It's in my Alzheimer's theory. I published it already in 2016. This information can help people to have a better brain by just taking a pill of lithium, a small amount of lithium, essential dose. It blows away the brain fog, most likely. There are studies out there. What I discovered already in my research with Alzheimer's disease, and it's part of my anti-Alzheimer's program, both as a preventive measure, but also as a therapeutic measure, because it was shown that with lithium, you can essentially interrupt the neuroinflammatory process. So neuroinflammation, which is the cause of the hippocampus not being able to grow, and the leading cause of depression and Alzheimer's, as we discussed, relies on a signal cascade in the immune cells in the brain. They're called microglia. And there's one enzyme, a signal transducer, which is called GSK3 beta. And GSK3 beta has a natural inhibitor, which is lithium. Not lithium as we use it for bipolar disorder in manic depressed people who get hundreds of milligrams a day, but essentially only 1 milligram, that would be an essential dose, is already sufficient to inhibit or at least to dampen the signal cascade. So anyway, there's a university in close to New York, where the conductor of the trial with lithium for brain fog, one of the major symptoms of post-vac or long COVID, and he tested 10 people, which came to him in his practice, and he checked them out and said, okay, I give you lithium, low dose lithium, really low dose, not the high dose, low dose lithium, and 9 of the 10, after a few days, the brain fog was gone. And it's totally in line with this research I've taken and understood what I worked on in the last 10 years. Actually, my paper that I mentioned before, the Unified Theory of Alzheimer's Disease, already has a full page on the effect of microdosed lithium on the hippocampus and how it is necessary to support it. Interestingly, I can show in an article I've just written, and you can find on my website, I've shown that it's actually an essential trace element. Interestingly, it's not even accepted as a potential essential trace element. Meaning in Germany, even the essential dose of 1 milligram, you have to have a prescription by a doctor. It's really crazy. But it was also shown, because GSK3 beta is also at the heart of the so-called cytokine storm, that the cytokine storm that actually kills people from COVID, And the main reason that people experience that, as I've shown in another book, is that they have a lack of vitamin D. There's also a story on my website. The lack of vitamin D is actually the reason we have a biased acting immune system. It overreacts, is not balanced, and this overreaction leads to an overproduction of cytokines, which actually are the reason people suffer from COVID. And I'm actually might die from COVID. For shown that a level of 125 nanomole per liter, essentially nobody would die from COVID. That's why so much force is in the main media from many scientists who work for the narrative that they say, well, you don't need vitamin D, it's not important.
Right.
But in a book I've written in 2021, it's called the Corona Syndrome. I propose that lithium might be as well able to inhibit the storm. And it was actually shown in a paper published at the end of 2022. It's a study where people were sick from COVID, sick enough to have to go to the hospital, not sick enough to enter the emergency, what's called, that they don't have to put on a breathing system. They essentially are sick, but not so sick that they are short before dying. But of course, they were on the course. And what they did is based on the idea that GSK3 beta is co-responsible for the cytokine storm. We can inhibit it maybe by lithium. So they gave them lithium. And what happened is the time they spent in the hospital was half of the control group. Nobody had to go to the intensive care unit. Nobody died compared to the control group, which didn't get any lithium. So lithium is at the key of helping us, our bodily immune system, the immune cells, are not overreacting. And of course, the brain cells don't get an overproduction of the cytokines that cause the neuroinflammation and the shutdown of the hippocampal growth. So it's really at the heart to provide your body with enough lithium. I mean, low-dose lithium or micro-dose lithium, not, again, the high dose that has a lot of side effects. We are a factor of 100 away from any side effects. So it's really safe. Interestingly, the lithium has additional activities, like, for example, it activates what we call autophagia. That is the eating up of the body of organelles, of proteins that are not functioning well, like, for example, the mitochondria. It's a very important process in the brain. So lithium actually helps to get rid of mitochondria in the cells that don't work anymore, so that the cells can engage in mitochondriogenesis, that is the new production of new mitochondria, and stay young. It's a reurination process which is activated by lithium. And the microphagia, that the eating up of small proteins, could actually even help to get rid of the spike protein. So that's why I'm supporting that people take lithium low dose as a preventive measure, but also as a therapeutic measure.
That's incredible. That's it. That talk about giving lithium a complete rebranding as an actual source of healing. That's really, I've not heard that before you. And it's interesting, of course, the connection to vitamin D, which was so, I mean, that was in the very earliest days when I was still having arguments on Facebook, when I realized that fats don't matter, was high doses of vitamin D having a huge effect to help people from this infection. So
absolutely, it was shown. The cause is shown. There's really proof that the lack of vitamin D is the issue for most people, 99% at least. Of course, other factors could also be a problem, but vitamin D is the major cause of severe COVID and even of death. And this explains why there's a strong agenda against vitamin D, because if you really want to install a global government, you need the people dying. Otherwise, a war without people being killed is not a war. So just go on my website, check it out, and help yourself.
Great. I hope that you'll come back, Dr. Nels, and keep us updated. And may your work be heard, honestly, throughout the globe. A lot of success to you. Thank you very much for your time.
I thank you for your time. It's very helpful. Without you, this message wouldn't go out, so I'm very grateful.
Thank you, Dr. Nels.
Those who would hold power over us have succeeded when they define the narrative in which we live. On social media and the internet, there is an all-out war to get your attention and provide your definitive story. This has been our theme throughout 2 years of reporting. These are its ruinous consequences now. There is one other lesson of COVID that applies here and always. Without accountability for what our future will look like, we will be led by those who wish to define it. It provides the easiest solution and the hardest of all, for it is entirely up to us. We'll see you next time on the Jerusalem Report.